The mason jar emerged from the muddy riverbank like a confession rising from the earth, its glass surface clouded with 4 years of secrets. Inside, rolled tight as a prayer, was a note written in trembling handwriting. If you're reading this, then Maya was right about everything. We should have listened. We should have run. But Maya Chen had been dead for 4 years. At least, that's what everyone believed. The rental house in Emerald Cove stood like a weathered sentinel against the Pacific coastline, its wraparound porch creaking in the salt-laden wind. 5 college juniors from Portland State had pooled their spring break money for this slice of coastal paradise, drawn by the town's reputation for pristine beaches and, more importantly, its distance from civilization. Maya Chen pressed her face against the van's window as they pulled into the gravel driveway, her breath fogging the glass. "This place gives me the creeps," she whispered, though she couldn't explain why. The house looked exactly like the photos online, charming, rustic, perfect for their week of freedom before finals consumed their lives. "You say that about everything," laughed Ethan Rodriguez, their self-appointed group leader whose infectious grin had carried them through 3 years of friendship. He killed the engine and stretched his arms overhead. "Come on, Chen. Live a little." Maya forced a smile, pushing down the inexplicable dread that had been building since they'd passed the faded, "Welcome to Emerald Cove" sign 20 minutes ago. She'd always been the anxious one, the girl who triple-checked locks and kept pepper spray on her keychain. Her friends called it paranoia. She called it survival. The other 3 were already unloading their bags with the enthusiasm of prisoners granted parole. There was Jenna Walsh, the pre-med student whose perfect academic record masked a growing addiction to prescription amphetamines, pills she'd been stealing from the campus health center where she volunteered. Her parents expected nothing less than medical school, and the pressure was slowly crushing her from the inside. David Kim, the quiet photography major, moved with careful precision as he handled his expensive camera equipment. He'd been documenting everything obsessively since sophomore year, claiming he was building a portfolio. In truth, he was gathering evidence for the tell-all book he planned to write about their friend group's secrets he'd been collecting like trophies, planning to monetize their trust. And then there was Sarah Martinez, whose family owned a chain of successful restaurants back in California. She'd been hiding her parents' recent bankruptcy, still paying for everything with credit cards that were maxed to their limits. This trip was supposed to be her grand finale before her world collapsed entirely. The locals at the gas station were interesting, Maya said, shouldering her backpack. An elderly man had stared at them with eyes like broken glass, muttering something about the hungry seasons before the cashier had quickly ushered him away. "Every small town has its characters," Ethan replied, though Maya noticed he avoided eye contact. He'd been acting strange all week, checking his phone obsessively and whispering into it when he thought no one was listening. The search teams had given up long ago. The Coast Guard had called off their efforts after 2 weeks of combing the treacherous waters around Emerald Cove. The rental house had been cleaned, re-rented, and eventually sold to a family from Seattle who had no idea about its history. But the locals remembered. They always remembered. Thomas Fairweather, a retired fisherman with hands like weathered rope, had been walking his dog along the Cascade River when he spotted the mason jar wedged between 2 moss-covered rocks. He'd lived in Emerald Cove for 73 years, long enough to know that the river gave up its secrets only when it was ready. Inside the jar, beneath the note, were 4 other items: a prescription bottle with Jenna's name on it, half empty and dated March 16, 2020. A memory card from David's camera, its plastic casing cracked but still intact. A credit card statement in Sarah's name showing a transaction at the Emerald Cove General Store on March 18, the day after they'd supposedly vanished. And strangest of all, a brass key attached to a chain, carved with symbols that made Thomas's grandmother's voice echo in his memory: "The old families never truly leave. They just wait beneath." The note continued on the back: "The Blackwood family has been taking visitors for over a century. They don't kill them. They keep them." Maya tried to warn us about the basement, about the scratches on the walls, about the way Mr. Blackwood watched us sleep. But we thought she was being paranoid. We thought we were safe because we were together. We were wrong. Maya's hands shook as she developed the film in the rental house's makeshift darkroom, a bathroom with thick towels hung over the window. She'd been taking pictures with an old film camera she'd found in the house's closet, something drawing her to document their stay in a way that felt more permanent than digital photos. The images that emerged from the chemical baths made her stomach drop. In every photo of their group, there was a sixth figure, a tall, thin man standing just at the edge of the frame, always partially obscured by shadows or furniture. His face was never fully visible, but his eyes were unmistakable, ancient, hungry, and fixed directly on the camera. Maya's breath came in short gasps as she studied the photographs. The man appeared in the background of their beach bonfire, lurking behind the driftwood pile. He was visible through the kitchen window while they cooked dinner, his silhouette pressed against the glass. In the most disturbing image, taken while they slept in the living room during their first night's movie marathon, he stood at the top of the stairs, his hand resting on the banister like a spider testing its web. "You guys need to see this," Maya called out, her voice cracking with terror. But when she emerged from the bathroom, the house was empty. Their belongings were still scattered around the living room: Jenna's textbooks, David's backup cameras, Sarah's designer purse. The coffee was still warm in their abandoned mugs. The front door stood wide open, creaking in the ocean breeze. Thomas Fairweather's phone call to the sheriff's department triggered a reopening of the case that had haunted Emerald Cove for 4 years. Detective Lisa Moreno, who had been a rookie when the students first disappeared, now found herself staring at evidence that challenged everything she thought she knew about the case. The memory card from David's camera contained over 300 photographs spanning their entire stay. Most were typical vacation shots, beach scenes, group selfies, artistic compositions of the coastal landscape. But the final dozen images told a different story entirely. The last photo, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. on March 19, 2020, showed the rental house's basement. The image was grainy, taken in near darkness with David's camera flash, but the details were unmistakable: 5 sleeping bags arranged in a circle on the concrete floor, occupied by motionless figures. The walls behind them were covered in scratches, not random marks, but deliberate carvings forming symbols that seemed to writhe in the camera's harsh light. Standing in the center of the circle was the same tall figure from Maya's photographs, but now his face was fully visible. Detective Moreno recognized him immediately from the town's historical archives: Nathaniel Blackwood, the patriarch of Emerald Cove's founding family, who had supposedly died in 1847. But the most disturbing element wasn't the impossible presence of a man who should have been dead for over a century. It was the expression on his face, not malevolent or threatening, but paternal. Protective. As if he were watching over his children. Maya's journal, found tucked inside the mason jar, contained her final entries: "The others think I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. But I can't shake the feeling that we're being hunted. Not by something evil, exactly, but by something that thinks it loves us. I found the basement door yesterday. It was hidden behind a bookshelf in the study, the kind of secret passage you'd expect in a horror movie. The stairs went down into darkness, and I could hear something moving below. Not footsteps. More like breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing, like something in hibernation. Ethan keeps insisting we should explore it together. He says it's probably just the house's old root cellar, that I'm being ridiculous. But I've seen how his eyes glaze over when he talks about it. It's like he's not really Ethan anymore. I think the house is changing us. Or maybe it's changing them, and I'm the only one who's resistant. Jenna's been taking more pills than usual, but instead of making her jittery, they're making her compliant. Sarah's stopped checking her phone entirely, which would have been impossible a week ago. David's been filming everything, but he won't let any of us see the footage. I'm going to hide this journal and some evidence in the woods by the river. If something happens to us, maybe someone will find it someday. Maybe they'll understand that we didn't just disappear. We were collected. The excavation of the rental house's basement began at dawn, supervised by a joint task force of state police, federal agents, and forensic anthropologists. What they found defied every protocol in their training manuals. The basement was larger than the house's blueprint indicated, extending deep into the hillside behind the property. The walls were indeed covered in carved symbols, but forensic analysis suggested they had been etched over the course of decades, possibly centuries. The symbols weren't random, they formed a complex pattern that seemed to map the coastal region, with specific locations marked by deeper, more elaborate carvings. At the center of the basement, they found 5 stone chambers, each perfectly sized for a human body. 4 of the chambers showed signs of recent use: fabric fibers, hair samples, and DNA evidence that matched the missing students. The 5th chamber, slightly smaller than the others, contained only a piece of paper with a single line written in Maya's handwriting: "I'm still here." I'm still watching. I'm still trying to warn them. But it was the discovery in the house's foundation that changed everything. Hidden behind a false wall, investigators found dozens of personal items spanning over a century: pocket watches, jewelry, photographs, and identification documents belonging to visitors to Emerald Cove who had been reported missing over the decades. The items were meticulously organized and preserved, arranged like museum displays with handwritten labels indicating dates and locations of collection. The oldest item was a leather-bound journal dating back to 1847, written by a woman named Elizabeth Hartwell. The Blackwood family welcomed us with such kindness. Their house by the sea feels like a sanctuary. I've never felt so safe, so protected. I think I shall stay here forever. The breakthrough came when Detective Moreno decided to search the town's historical records for any property owned by the Blackwood family. What she found was a network of houses, cabins, and stretching along the entire Oregon coast, all owned by various members of the Blackwood family tree spanning back to the 1840s. The pattern was consistent: every few years, small groups of travelers would disappear from these properties. The local authorities would investigate, find no evidence of foul play, and eventually close the cases. The properties would change hands, often to distant relatives or shell companies, but the disappearances would continue. Maya's journal contained one final entry, written in a different handwriting, shakier, more frantic: "They're not dead. None of us are dead. We're kept. We're preserved. We're part of the collection now. The Blackwoods believe they're saving us from the world's cruelty, protecting us from time itself. They feed us, care for us, love us in their own twisted way. But we're not allowed to leave. We're not allowed to age. We're not allowed to change. I don't know how I'm writing this. I don't know how I got this journal to the river. Part of me, the part that's still Maya, fights against the contentment they try to force on us. I remember who I was before the basement. I remember the world above. If you find this, don't come looking for us. Don't try to save us. We're too far gone now, too much a part of their family. But watch for the signs. Watch for the houses. Watch for the kindness that feels too perfect, too safe. The Blackwoods are still collecting. They're still adding to their family. And they're getting better at it." The rental house was demolished 3 days later, but the basement chambers were left intact as a crime scene. Federal agents continued their investigation, following the trail of Blackwood properties along the coast. Several more houses revealed similar basement chambers, similar collections of personal items, similar evidence of long-term inhabitation by people who should have been declared dead decades ago. But no bodies were ever found. No survivors were ever recovered. Detective Moreno's final report noted that all evidence suggested the missing students were being held against their will in an elaborate kidnapping operation spanning multiple generations. The case remained open, with federal resources dedicated to tracking down the remaining Blackwood properties and any surviving family members. What the report didn't mention was the package that arrived at Detective Moreno's office 1 week after the basement excavation. Inside was a new photograph, taken with David Kim's distinctive artistic style: 5 figures standing on a beach at sunset, their faces peaceful and content. They looked exactly as they had 4 years ago, not a day older, not a mark of suffering on their faces. On the back of the photograph, in Maya's handwriting, was a single line: "We're still here. We're still watching. And we're not alone anymore." The photograph was taken on a beach that didn't exist on any map of the Oregon coast. The lighthouse in the background had been torn down in 1923. And the date stamp on the image showed it had been taken just 3 days after the basement excavation began. Detective Moreno kept the photograph locked in her desk drawer and never mentioned it in any official report. Some mysteries, she realized, were meant to remain unsolved. Some families were meant to keep their secrets. But late at night, when the fog rolled in from the Pacific and the lighthouse beam swept across her bedroom window, she couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere along the coast, in a house that existed between the maps and the memory, Maya Chen was still trying to warn people about the kindness of strangers. And every spring, when the tourists began to arrive for their coastal vacations, Detective Moreno would patrol the highways leading to the small towns along the shore, watching for rental vans full of young people, searching for the perfect place to spend their break from the world. She never found them in time. She never found them at all. But sometimes, on the quietest nights, she could swear she heard Maya's voice carried on the ocean wind, still calling out warnings that no one would ever hear.